This is a GEO podcast. I'm Cadwell Turnbull.
Cadwell?
Yes, hey Tim.
Hey, glad we finally connected.
For this podcast, I got to talk with Tim Huet, a co-founder of the Arizmendi Association of Worker Co-ops.
What would you like to talk about?
I guess first I would like to ask, how did you get started in cooperativism?
Well, there's the long answer and the short answer. Which one do you want?
The long one.
My father was an iron worker, and when I was age 9, my parents sat me down and with my sisters and said, your father's going on strike, but we'll all be okay because the union has money and your dad will get paid during the strike. I had no word for cooperative, no inkling of how difficult it would be, but from that early age, I thought, if you know how to do the work and you're the ones who take the risk and all those other things, why bother with those other people? That idea lodged in my brain, and when I finally did encounter cooperatives, it really resonated as something that I wanted to build. My first cooperative project really wouldn't have been called a cooperative project, but I worked at the student-owned and operated paper at the University of Michigan, and we elected our editors, and we decided our editorial stances by vote, democratically. And I really realized only after years later that was a cooperative. I was part of a cooperative, and it seemed like a very natural way. It seemed like the natural way to operate. And then, you go out into the normal world and you don't see that anywhere. So I would say that was really my first experience of cooperative, even though no one there really thought of themselves as a cooperative or referred to it as cooperative. It was really a worker cooperative. But I moved out to the Bay Area with the intention to go to law school, to develop skills, to support workers' rights. I thought mostly as an organizer, but also maybe doing class action lawsuits. But I was still really looking for what we could do differently, because I'd gotten really good at arguing people into the position of seeing why the current system was destroying the planet and creating all these social injustices. But the question always would come down to, well, what can you offer better? And I had no answer to that. And I had done my independent study as an undergraduate about the students' movements of the 60s and 70s, because I was a college student in the 80s, and there didn't seem to be as much of a political movement. And the question for me was, where did all those people go? And part of the conclusion I came to was that if you don't change the economic system, you will eventually be absorbed into the economic system. So I had that idea in mind that we needed an economic base for a democratic movement. And I kept reading, and when I ran across a book about the Mondragon cooperatives, I said, that's it. That's the thing that brings everything together. We need to build more of those. I was in law school, and no one else in law school had ever heard of it, and no one I knew was heard of that or was interested in that. And so I just figured I would finish law school, and I would start a practice, and I would start to try to connect with existing small cooperatives around and see if they were, interested in building this larger thing. But as it happened, I shared an office with someone who got a fax about a housing co-op conference. And I said to her, this is really great because I've been building my practice, but what I really want to do is get involved with cooperatives. There's this thing called Mondragon and blah, 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 blah. And she said, we have a study group about Mondragon here every week. So just on the other side of the wall of it from where I'd been working. So I started going to that study group, and then one person took me aside at a certain point. He said, you seem to actually want to do something about this. I want to introduce you to another person. And that other person was Steve Fetcher, who works at the Cheese Board. And so the three of us started a smaller study group that was very specifically about how you translate the lessons from Mondragon and to a certain degree from the Italian cooperatives to the U.S. context. Our study led us to the conclusion that what we should be doing is trying to find successful cooperatives in the U.S. and creating new cooperatives based on them within a network. So we looked around for a business that we thought could be replicated and create jobs, and it didn't take us long to focus on the Cheese Board.
The Cheese Board is a now famous worker cooperative located in Berkeley, California, that makes, among other things, 400 different kinds of cheese, bread, pastries, and pizza.
One of our members worked there, so we had built up a lot of trust, and they're a very successful co-op. So we did a feasibility study of what it would take to replicate their business, or at least part of their business, and create new cooperatives and a network. And then we approached them and said, this is what we want to do. Would you be willing to allow us to do this share your recipes, allow your name to be used, and many other things eventually.
The Cheese Board agreed, and the Arizmendi Association of Cooperatives was founded.
There's 200 of us now in the association. There's 9 cooperatives, and I'm part of the 9th one, which is the Technical Assistance Cooperative. The job of our cooperative is to start new cooperatives and support the existing ones in the association. And that's the majority of my working hours. But I also do organizational consulting and legal work for other cooperatives. Primarily work for cooperatives, a little bit with housing cooperatives. I also live in a housing cooperative.
Wow.
Cooperation 24/7 here. We actually formed the association legally in 95, but we kind of celebrate more the anniversary in 96. And the first store, the first replication, Arizmendi, opened in 97. So it was a long process to get it going. We were very clear from the beginning that it was going to take us a long time to develop those first few co-ops, that what we were trying to do was build an engine for accelerating and creating more cooperatives quickly. Our financial model is fueled by the fees of the cooperatives we create. So once they become profitable, they start to pay fees into the association, and that pays for the ongoing services, but it also builds up a fund to create new co-ops.
It sounds to me that even considering that it's 23 years, that's a lot accomplished in that amount of time. It's quite remarkable.
I hope that's right. When you're inside it, I'm an impatient person by nature, and I'm impatient with the current society and worried that it's going to collapse and keep harming a lot of people. So to me, it just doesn't seem very fast. We have succeeded. None of our businesses have failed, and we keep building momentum. So that I think we can be assured by. I was living in a collective house. We had just gone through a very long process of interviewing people and settled on someone that we were going to invite. And people thought she was going to be good, but they weren't wild about her. And then right after we had just finished that meeting, Kirsten called and had seen the ad, and she sounded cool to me on the phone. And I went around to all my housemates and I said, if she can get over to our house in the next 15 minutes, would you be willing to stay around for one more interview? And they were. And luckily for us, because she is awesome. So she moved in, but, I'm not going to hit on one of my female housemates. So we were attracted to each other, but kind of kept that suppressed for a while. I went on a trip to visit the Mondragon cooperatives and the Italian cooperatives, and it was while I was gone, which was about 6 weeks of touring, that she really recognized that she missed me in a way that she didn't expect to miss just a friend and housemate. And it was the thing that made her intent to tell me how she felt when I got back. So in that way, cooperatives also fed into our relationship. Is my going to study cooperatives gave us the space to recognize the developing love between us. We first had a partnership ceremony because even though we're a heterosexual couple, we didn't believe in getting married when other people couldn't get married. So we had a ceremony that we called a celebration of love and community. We made a zine. We asked people to say, what is love and community? How do they work together in your life? And what do you want to see more manifest in your life? So created that, and we asked people, instead of giving gifts, to give stories or something that they made that involves cooperation. And we had a song list that was for us about love and community in terms of not just cooperatives, but building justice and things like that. So it was really meant to be more of that. The fact that we eventually got married, and that was just a few years ago, was really just more about recognizing that now that there's legal marriage for everyone, that we might as well not be paying more taxes and giving up benefits that other people get to have because of legally recognized relationships. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We both live in a housing cooperative now, so our lives have grown more in common, both occupationally, become more and more enmeshed in cooperative communities together. I feel very lucky. Speaking for myself, being in a cooperative has given me skills that I didn't have before that hopefully have benefited our relationship, and I think the same is true for her. She's more of a naturally emotionally wise person than I am, so she already had some of those communication personal skills, but for me, being in cooperatives and both learning about communication and getting trainings and becoming a mediator myself, I think gave me certain skills that we apply in our relationship on a daily basis. It also gives us a common frame of reference, because if I was working on building a cooperative economy all the time and my partner didn't have that experience, then when I would talk to her about things like, well, I'm encountering this or I'm encountering that, she just wouldn't have the same frame of reference to be able to hear what I'm saying, and I wouldn't have the same frame of reference to hear what she's talking about with her work. So the fact that we both worked in cooperatives together gives us that common frame, but I think also a common sense of mission. I think for a lot of people, if you are in a relationship, in a long-term relationship, having a common project that you're building on that's bigger than just yourself is really valuable, whether that's children or whether that's a larger social cause or what have you. And I think that's been enriched our relationship. This is a slightly personal story, but I actually just went and saw a doctor for the first time yesterday, this particular doctor. He asked what kind of work I did, and I said I'm a business developer and a mediator and a attorney. And he said, oh, well, what kind of businesses? And I said, well, I don't know if you've heard of worker co-ops. I develop worker co-ops. And he was like, oh, you mean like Arizmendi? And I said, yeah, which was nice that he had that experience and knew what it was from that. But the thing he said about it was, you know, I go there and the food is really great, but the thing I really notice is that the people all seem happy to be there and that they're not fighting among themselves and that they're working together. And so that was really gratifying to me, because that's really what I want people to experience. For me, what's most exciting is when someone gets hired into a co-op and they've never heard of a co-op before, and all of a sudden they start to develop communication skills about conflict resolution and speaking up for themselves, and instead of complaining when things are bad, coming up with proposals of what they would like to see differently. So I see that all the time in people, where they develop skills in the cooperative that then spill over into their family life and into their other community life. I get to see that, and I get to be part of that, and that's one of the things that really sustains me. To me, worker cooperatives are democracy demonstration schools. They're something that people can experience, because a lot of people don't really have hope for a different kind of vision for society. But when they see it in action, when they experience it, they ask questions. And I've definitely seen a lot of people who weren't even workers in the cooperative, but customers who experienced the cooperative, and then it opened their eyes to the possibility that there is a different way for people to relate to each other. And then that started them off on a path to either create their own cooperatives or find different kinds of living arrangements or what have you. We have a myth in our society that competition is the natural thing, being out for yourself, and that's how we succeed as a species. And that's just not true. We actually succeed as a species by cooperating with each other. And in fact, the overall arc of history is for human society and non-human society to become more and more cooperative. I think a lot of people are resigned to economic exploitation. They're resigned to ecological denigration. They just don't see any alternative, and they need to see an alternative to actually feel hopeful and think, oh, there's a reason for me to build something else. I always say to people, we don't just produce bread, we produce hope and sustenance for people, and I definitely see people responding to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was great talking to you.
Great talking to you. Have a great one.
Tim Huet is a co-founder of the Arizmendi Association of Worker Co-ops and a longtime friend of GEO. Learn more about the association and its cooperatives at arizmendi.coop.